You shouldn't be able to erase someone just by changing a few words and forms. And yet, the trace disappears, and the signatures stay clean. Alex Morel, former archive analyst for a European service, scrolls through a microfiche. A declassified note, 5 barely legible words, sticks to his skin. Lumumba must not survive. Alex is paid to file, not to understand. Yet the more he turns the pages, the more an impression imposes itself. Someone, somewhere, decided that an African prime minister was a problem to be solved, not a counterpart. And this problem is called Patrice Lumumba. The trap doesn't look like a movie conspiracy. It's cables, telegrams, familiar signatures, and silences. The unease settles in. It all starts with a tiny inconsistency. In a file on decolonization, Alex comes across an American report from 1960 that describes Lumumba as volatile but manageable. 2 pages later, an internal memo from the same service classifies the same man as in extreme danger to Western strategic interests. Between the two, a date, circled in red pencil by some forgotten colleague, June 30th, 1960, the day of Congo's independence. It's not an analytical note. It's a brutal shift in assessment. Something happened that day, in front of everyone, but written nowhere in these archives. The discrepancy remains. Alex starts over from scratch. All he has are reports, telegrams, minutes. No spectacular scene, just a trajectory. He first sees the setting sketched out in the margins of the documents. A gigantic territory labeled as a strategic colony, controlled by a governor-general, administrators, and above all, mining companies whose names appear everywhere. Union Minière du Haut-Katanga, Fourminière. Every time he reads uranium, the mention Shinkolobwe appears in the margin, linked to the Manhattan Project. Nothing romantic. It's an inventory of stocks, cold accounting. In this administrative landscape where Congolese people have almost no voice, one name starts to come up: Patrice Emery Lumumba. At first as a simple postal employee in Stanleyville, listed among the evolved. The reports describe him as polite, ambitious, well-rated. Then his name appears in other sections: associations, local press, a text in La Voix du Congolais calling for equal rights. They annotate his sentences. They underline equality in blue pen. The judicial archives reproduce his conviction for embezzlement in 1957. Alex reads the amounts, the justifications, the circumstances. He notes that the same files report his early release the following year. It is not yet clear whether this was an actual offense, a maneuver, or both. What is certain is that Lumumba's name leaves the drawer of minor civil servants and enters that of political surveillance. The shift is silent. October 1958, creation of the Congolese national movement. In a Belgian telegram, Alex notes a chilling sentence: oriented toward unity, overcoming ethnic divisions, broad base. It doesn't sound like a compliment. A unitary party in a colony built on division is unsettling. The notes insist, demands independence and political sovereignty. In parallel, other papers mention a Manifesto of African Consciousness, then a Belgian plan proposing 30 years to reach independence. 30 years on paper, a few lines in the margins, and then one event breaks everything. The Leopoldville riots, early 1959. The words, dozens of deaths, recur, without details. At that point, the tone changes. The reports stop describing and start anticipating. It is then that Alex sees a new field appear in Western documents: risk of Soviet influence. Congo moves to a different column. It is no longer just a matter of colonial administration, but a Cold War case. Lumumba, meanwhile, moves across the files. Arrested after unrest in 1959, sentenced to 6 months, then urgently released to take part in the Brussels Roundtable. In the minutes of this conference, his name is circled, commented on. Multi-ethnic base, oratorical skills, potential intransigence. It is during these days that the date of June 30th, 1960 is set for independence, with elections planned beforehand. Alex notes a handwritten remark in the margin of a Belgian telegram: man to be closely controlled. The same man will be prime minister a few months later, at the head of a government that also includes Joseph Kasavubu as president and a certain Joseph Mobutu, noted at that time as a simple Secretary of State for Defense. Another document hits him, a report on the Pan-African Conference in Accra, where Lumumba meets anti-colonial activists and delegates from socialist countries. The Western tone tightens another notch. Suspicious contacts, radical speeches. At this stage, the American, Belgian, and British services officially open stations on the ground. The Congo is no longer a colony. It is a security file. The frame has closed. Alex's hypothesis A. All this could have remained a game of pressure, surveillance, political maneuvering. A tough management of an independence deemed too rapid, but without prior murderous intent. A monitored nationalist, a harassed government, Western services obsessed with uranium and fear of the Soviets, but still within the bounds of a harsh political confrontation. This hypothesis collapses in a single line, in a later memo. Instructions received to obtain the elimination of Lumumba by all effective means. The shock is stark. Hypothesis B. The Western services had made the central decision, directed everything, planned everything. A scenario in which Washington and Brussels pull every string, from Katanga to the corridors of the UN, right up to the final gunshot in the bush. Alex tries to verify this document by document. The evidence exists, massive, but it does not fit perfectly with this pattern. He reads about the setting up of the CIA station in Leopoldville, Alan Dulles' orders to remove Lumumba from the political scene, the dispatch of Sidney Gottlieb with his toxins, handed over to Lawrence Devlin, the poisoning plans, recorded and then abandoned. He also sees the Belgian archives, diplomatic pressure, support for the Katangan secessionists, flows of money to opponents like Mobutu. The two lines, American and Belgian, intersect without ever merging into a single explicit chain of command. The execution of January 17th appears mainly in Belgian and Katangan files. Local decision, presence of Belgian officers, moral responsibility acknowledged by a parliamentary commission. The CIA, in the documents, seems to have taken part in the destabilization, encouraged the sidelining, but not pulled the trigger itself. The idea of a single order from Washington to kill that night does not hold up against the papers. Hypothesis B flips. It is not the Western services that control everything. It is local actors, Katangans and Congolese, who use, solicit, exploit Western support to settle their scores. Hypothesis C, the one Alex formulates in a low voice in his office. What if the heart of the matter was neither in Brussels, nor in Washington, nor in Leopoldville, but in the deliberate absence of a clear line? A kind of gray area where everyone understands what is desired without ever writing it down, where neutralize, eliminate, remove are enough to authorize the worst. If no one signs the order, who is responsible? The silence weighs heavily. Alex stumbles over a single thing. Why, despite what he reads, is there almost nothing that explicitly says, kill him that night in that place? The documents from the beginning of the Congolese crisis are precise. He follows the chronology as one follows a manhunt. A few days after June 30, the mutiny of the Force Publique, Thijsville, other garrisons. Belgian officers are targeted. Settlers leave the country in haste. In the reports, the panic is described in dry terms. Risk of widespread unrest. The Congolese government decides to Congolize the army. Mobutu is propelled to chief of staff. In Western cables, his name is underlined, rarely criticized. Belgium sends troops to protect its nationals. The words, without clear agreement, appear. In this chaos, the secession of Katanga stands out as a clean break. In Elizabethville, Moise Tshombe is described as pragmatic, reliable, supported by mining circles. Union Miniere appears everywhere in the background. They talk about copper, cobalt, but the subtext, Alex knows it, uranium. Lumumba, for his part, calls on the UN for help. Joint cables with Kasavubu, a request for the withdrawal of Belgian troops, a demand for respect of territorial integrity. Resolution 143. Alex reads it line by line. Withdrawal requested, deployment of a UN force. On paper, everything seems doable. On the ground, the reports note something else. Limited UN troops, restricted mandate, refusal to help Lumumba militarily to retake Katanga. Alex then reads the request for aid sent to Moscow. Soviet planes, advisors, troop transport. In American notes, the adjectives become alarmist. Possible shift of the Congo into the Soviet orbit. From that point on, everything tightens. The exchanges between the State Department and the CIA explicitly mention the need to prevent this shift, but never a fire. Alex's wall is that slippage between removing from power and making disappear physically. He can trace all the political steps, the break with Kasavubu, the crossed radio announcements of dismissal, Mobutu's coup de force declaring the institutions neutralized. He sees Lumumba being placed under house arrest, the Ghanaian blue helmets in front of his house. The CIA reports on his every move. He can even follow his escape by car towards Stanleyville, his capture near Port Franquis, his transfer to Ticeville prison. And then, in the telegrams, a new tone appears. Fear that he might be freed by his supporters. Major risk if he reaches Stanleyville. The Belgian archives then mention tense discussions with the Katangan authorities about the suitability of a transfer. The idea is never stated bluntly, but everything leads to it, sending him where he has the most enemies, where they know what his presence represents. Alex's blockage is not a lack of information. It is the abundance of cautious formulations that dodge the decisive word. Everyone talks about neutralization, stabilization, the restoration of order. Everyone knows that by handing him over to secessionist Katanga, they are condemning him to death, but no one writes it. In a Belgian file, Alex comes across a detail that haunts him. An administrative report notes logistical problems during a prisoner transfer. Crushing heat in the plane, lack of water, handcuffs too tight. A banal paragraph in an ocean of paperwork. Yet he imagines Lumumba's wrists, cut by the metal, the scorching sheet metal of the fuselage, the hostile soldiers all around. He then understands that the wall is not only political, it is a choice of language that makes it impossible even to write pain. In the internal reports of the services, there is another constant, fear of a precedent. If one admits in black and white that a head of government was assassinated with the tacit approval of Western powers, an entire system falters. So they reduce, they dilute, they speak of moral responsibility, of a troubled context. They blame the confusion of the moment, the Cold War, local rivalries. Alex realizes that he is coming up against what these texts refuse to say. A single reason dominates and crushes all the rest. The terror of seeing the Congo, with its strategic minerals, slip away from the Western camp. Everything is organized around this point. And this is precisely what makes the final act impossible to find in the archives. It is both obvious and unspeakable. When Alex consults specialized historians, the consensus can be summed up in a few words. Without the active intervention of Western powers, Lumumba would probably not have been overthrown and handed over to his enemies so quickly. Some researchers, however, qualify this, emphasizing the decisive role of Congolese and Katangan actors, who were not mere puppets but opportunistic allies with their own calculations, their hatreds, their ambitions. What many experts still refuse to fully acknowledge, Alex senses in their silences. The fear that by fully recognizing the role of Western services in this affair, one would have to reconsider a whole part of African decolonization as a succession of security operations rather than as an assumed political process. At the beginning of his investigation, Alex believed he was working on an extreme case, a sort of tragic exception, a political assassination at the heart of the Cold War, with ingredients that were almost too perfect: a charismatic leader, Western secret services, a mining colony, a fractured country. He thought he would find, at the end of his plunge into the archives, a moment, a document, a signature that would reveal the truth. Who gave the order? When? How? What he discovers instead is less spectacular, but heavier. He goes back over the first pages. A Belgian Congo almost entirely administered by the colonial power, without real national political representation before the final years. An economy structured around Western mining companies, tied to strategic programs like the Manhattan Project. A territory where Congolese sovereignty does not exist, except in the nascent discourse of nationalists. He follows Lumumba from a post as a PTT civil servant in Stanleyville to the podium of the Pan-African Conference in Accra. He watches him move from the local columns of La Voix du Congolais to the reports of the CIA, the Belgian Sûreté, MI6. At each step, what seemed to be a simple personal file becomes a point of friction between two worlds. The one that sees the Congo as a stock of minerals in a global dashboard, and the one that demands that this territory become a sovereign nation. For a long time, Alex had wanted to believe that the heart of the mystery was a secret meeting, a few men in a room coldly deciding to eliminate a prime minister. The documents he reads do indeed mention plans for poisoning, toxins discreetly brought in, schemes never carried out. They also mention money, advice, logistical support for ambitious military officers, rival nationalists, secessionists backed by mining companies. But as the pages go by, another image takes shape. Lumumba is not killed by a perfect conspiracy. He is trapped in a mechanism where each actor understands what the others especially do not want to say out loud. Western intelligence services do not sign the execution order. They create, support, protect the forces that will make it possible. The Belgian authorities do not draft a death warrant. They help, arm, supervise those who do not hide their hatred of Lumumba.
The Katangan leaders may not have received an imperative telegram. They sense that by making him disappear, they are aligning themselves with what their external allies expect, without spelling it out. The illusion that shatters for Alex is simple. He believed that by finding who killed Lumumba, he could single out a few culprits, close the case on a set of names, faces, agencies. What he discovers is a diffuse responsibility, braided together out of mining interests, geopolitical fears, Congolese rivalries, diplomatic calculations, and violent improvisations on the ground. The image of a hero sacrificed by a single, all-powerful Western bloc does not entirely hold up. But the opposite idea, that of a purely local murder without serious involvement of foreign services, also falls apart. What remains are converging traces, constant surveillance, assassination plans prepared and then abandoned, massive funding for Lumumba's opponents, political support for the secessionists, the physical presence of Belgian officers at the very moment when he is beaten, moved, shot, then dissolved in acid. When Alex closes the last box, the conclusion that haunts him is less clear, darker. Lumumba was not eliminated by an isolated fit of madness, but by a system that, faced with the possibility of losing control over a territory deemed vital, accepted that certain things be done as long as they were not put in writing. He thinks back to the tooth returned to the DRC, to those official regrets expressed decades later, to those words of moral responsibility. And this question, which he cannot shake off, presses itself on him. How many other independences were negotiated under the silent threat of services ready for anything, as long as they left no irrefutable proof? In an almost empty archive room, the cold light of the neon tubes cuts across rows of anonymous boxes. Alex takes off his paper gloves and throws them into a trash can already overflowing with other crumpled pairs. On the table, one file remains open. At the center, an ordinary detainee transfer form, stamped with violet ink, speckled with fine brown marks. In the distance, through a narrow window, one can make out the wavering reflection of a flag, impossible to identify.